Our guest today is Dr. Ishita Tiwary, who is an assistant professor in film studies.
So my background is not just in film studies. I did my MA in film production as well. So with OTT coming in, people are like, why would I watch a drama on screen? When television came, then video came, then cable television came. Now we have like OTT. History has shown us that this debate has happened before also many times. But film is very expensive to shoot and only the rich people can afford that, unlike video.
Typical idea of a wedding that is conveyed to us through Bollywood or some of the popular videos of that era is very North Indian, upper
Yes,
caste.
DD discards its editing equipment. So they take that discarded editing equipment from the gray market and use it to edit videos. Because Hum
Yes.
Aapke Hai Kaun is a 3 hour marriage video. Because of the fact that the censor board was did not allow bold scenes and would like really go and censor you'll only see the flowers meeting or whatever.
Yes, and this whole satellite channel industry, was this partially responsible for ending video films in some sense?
For sure, for sure. Their Mandal coverage for me is problematic. We think that whatever theory comes from United States and Western Europe is universalizing, and whatever like comes from India or Latin America or like Senegal or like China, it's local.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Coffee House Experience. Our guest today is Dr. Ishita Tiwary, who is an assistant professor in film studies and the Canada Research Chair at the Department of Cinema at Concordia University, Montreal. She's also the director of the research lab Raah. Ishita's research interests include, among others, video cultures, media infrastructures, and media aesthetics. We'll be discussing Ishita's book, Video Culture in India, The Analog Era Today, which deep dives into the diverse socio-political media history of the analog video era in India. And she uses an interdisciplinary lens to delve deeper into this history. This includes a mixture of oral histories, archival resources, and old tapes. So today's episode will be going into the vibrant video world of the 1980s, a time when VHS, camcorders, public access TV was in vogue in India, and these were all imported from the States. And you had a mix of do-it-yourself filmmakers, bootleg mixtapes, and the sorts. Welcome, Ishita, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for taking an interest in an academic book.
Yep. So I think let's start at the very basics. So David Byrne had this very interesting concept in his book, How Music Works, where he discussed how the kind of music a band plays is often a function of the venue and the kind of audiences that the band is actually playing for. What is the kind of subject that video per se entails to capture, and how is it different from, say, the kind of subject that a normal movie would look to capture, if at all there's a difference? Maybe we can start from there.
Okay, I think it like video is such a broad term. What is video?
Yep.
Like is video TV? Is video like analog video? Is video streaming video on demand? So is video like something that you just did recorded on your mobile phone or in the 80s, like you said, a camcorder, and it's a birthday party or a movie or a wedding. Like these, so what is video? So like in that sense, one thing I want to just start off with that video is so elastic. It can be defined in so many ways. But I think like because we are talking about the book, so I'll specifically focus that as an example to perhaps also I think can apply to all these other types of videos I'm talking about.
Right.
I think what really characterizes video, like the storytelling that we get on video, is a very intimate kind of storytelling. And by intimacy, I'm talking about like a very drama-driven, character-driven story. And why is that so? For many reasons. For instance, so my background is not just in film studies. I did my MA in film production as well. And so that really informs the way I look at like film too. And so I did a lot of like interviews and on ground research with people who actually made videos at that time. And something really interesting that was coming out was when they were talking about shooting video was like they talked about the capability that they could zoom in and zoom out. It
Right.
was really good for capturing close-ups. Because there was this, it was very detail oriented. You can capture those details. So that was really interesting because close-up is something very intimate. And then, like, a lot of them talked about the fact that in the 80s, for instance, when video films are being made, which is like straight to video erotic thrillers, which is by Hiba Films, and Hiba was a subsidiary of Stardust, which was, if people remember, India's like biggest.
Narihira. Yep.
Yeah, Narihira just passed away. And it was like kind of changed the way like film tabloid journalism functioned in India, which is sensationalist, which really went into deep into the stars' lives. And so his straight to video thrillers were, you talked about bootlegging in the beginning. He actually was bootlegging. He was watching like these like videos of like Hollywood films and he would just kind of bootlegging and make it Indian. But they
Right.
would be straight to video erotic thrillers with women as protagonists. There would be kind of these femme fatales. And usually they would kind of they would there would be sequences that I don't think you still see in like Indian movie content anymore. For example, I don't know if people would even know like Persis Khambata,
Star
who before
Wars.
who before Aishwarya was India's
Star
first
Wars.
export to the West, right?
Yes.
She actually was the biggest video film star, and people would not know she acted in video films. And Hiba's biggest hit was something called Shingora. And if people are interested, I think that they keep on uploading like copies of it online because it's still so popular. And my
I
favorite,
actually saw it on Daily Motion. I'm being honest. When I came across this movie's title in your book, I saw it
yeah,
on Daily Motion, and the reason why I wanted to seek it out is special. There's this weird interview of Zarina Wahab where I think, among other things, she was discussing her husband's affairs and also how they actually
yeah.
met. So that's where I think she alluded to the fact that it was, I think, at Narihira's bungalow in Mud Island where they actually first met, because it was a very tight unit and they were literally shooting 3-4 movies at a time and it was all on video. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Mud Island as was where he would have his entire setup, right? And he would use all these things in Stardust to sell them as gossip. So she like Persis Kambata's got the cat's crown, she's on the cover, there's something happening. So there's this sequence which I find super interesting. So, like in this movie, she is this very successful architect. It's the 80s, mind you.
Yep.
Right. And she's a successful architect. And by night, she's like, okay, I've worked really hard at my job. She goes to the disco. It's also the time of the disco. Like, just let's be, to give more context to it. And she goes and picks up men every night. And so
Right.
one night she picks up Aditya Pancholi's. And the next morning, he wakes up and he's just kind of like, "Tum kitni khoobsurat lag rahi ho," and like just kind of raving about her, and she's really disinterested in him. And she gets a call from another lover of hers, and she's like, "Oh yeah, darling, let's meet tonight." And he's like, "How can you meet this guy?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "We just made love, we are in love." And she's like, "No, we're not in love. We just spent a night together." And he's like, "Oh my God, you used me. And how can you do this to me?" And she just laughs and kind of says, "Another one bites the dust." But again, this is all done in close-ups or mid shots, not like long shots. And which is in contrast in 80s, which is probably the worst era of Bollywood, though I think like 2020s can give a run for its money right now, that the era
Yep.
we are in.
Absolutely.
And so they had to like make multi-starrer action films. And Hiba tried to make a multi-starrer action, like an action film with Persis Khambata, which flopped, called Jazeera. And the reason was that, like, because video, unlike film, cannot be spectacle driven, right? So it cannot capture those like long shots, the dynamism, like which video can capture the dynamism of movement, but that grandness that video cannot capture. It's very intimate, it's very story driven, it's character driven. And I think that's what video does, is that's why when you think about what is short on video, you will think about character-driven dramas, you'll think about marriage videos, you'll think about birthday parties, you'll think about like videos you just made on like citizen journalism videos. Think about what's happening right now also with OTT coming in. People are like, why would I watch a drama on screen? I will watch it, I'll wait for OTT and watch it. I will watch, people want to watch spectacle kind of films, right? So they'll want to watch an Avengers or a Mission Impossible or a Pushpa or an RRR rather than like a small intimate drama driven films like Lapata Ladies. And so I think that's something that video does. I think it's something that's very intimate, character driven. And that's kind of the stories that we see perhaps on video.
And it's perfect in the sense that the kind of stories that say video films catered to or were a niche for back in the 80s, Netflix, Amazon Prime are filling in those same gaps. And whenever it
Exactly.
comes to spectacle, you only, or some big fat grand Karan Johar movie, you only go to the hall to watch such a movie. But if it's a romantic comedy or if it is offbeat, then you prefer waiting for that movie till it comes on OTT, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's also the larger thing that people think that, oh, it's a new thing. This is a new technological development. Film is dead. But agar in various points of history, this has happened whenever new technologies have come, film has come under threat. And
Yes.
industries have to respond to that threat. Like, when there was silent cinema, then sound came, when television came, then video came, then cable television came. Now we have like OTT, and in the industry has to respond to these new technological developments accordingly. And so it's going also one of the multiple reasons why we are finding ourselves into this crisis. But I think that what we are going right now is nothing new. History has shown us that this debate has happened before also many times. And one of those times has also been when, as you said, video filled that gap in, which Amazon and Netflix are doing right now. So I
Yeah.
think that that's something that that's an interesting part for me just to think about media histories.
Maybe let's dial back a little and go back to the origin of video in India in some sense. It's the 1982 Asian Games. It's video as a spectacle of sorts. All this while you're used to reportage, either in the form of very short reels shown at movie theaters, or you are looking at photographs in different magazines, papers, etc., where you actually see a video and you actually can tangibly get a sense of the action in the sporting arena. How does that really play into the psyche of Indian audiences, and why is the first adoption ground for video the marriage market? Like one obvious example is Rajesh Khanna, and he was the first pioneer of sorts, right? Because his and Khanna's marriage was the first much videographed event or marriage that was distributed at large scale. Why did this catch on, maybe?
I mean, first of all, I think many things to it. So in 80s, when India adopted video, video was seen as a technology of modernity. The
Yeah.
information and broadcasting minister was like, like this black and white technology is dead, like a dodo. Video is going to be this modernity. It was also technology as a means for India's to project modernity and development with the Asian Games, besides other things. So video was part of that entire project. The government at that time envisioned video as a pedagogical tool, as a tool for teaching, as a tool for like informing people, not for entertainment. They never envisioned that this was going to happen. And so Doordarshan obviously started like shooting on video. And that also, I'll come to later, has an interesting relationship with the marriage video as well. But what happens though is that the government's plan goes awry. It doesn't really become a tool for information entertainment because it becomes a gray market object. It starts flooding the gray market. And there's a circuit that's also like is activated. Maybe it's like Japan, China, Nepal border coming to India. There are lots of these markets that people can act because import tariffs are so high. So you can't really like get these access to this technology unless you go to these pirate bazaars. So you get these
Right.
used tapes or used camcorders or like pirated bootleg camcorders. So there's also class element as to who gets to watch and use video, which is the middle class and the upper classes.
Yes.
Which is very, very important to keep in mind that it does democratize, but only to an extent, which is a very small percentage of our population. And Rajesh Khanna's wedding video in the 70s gets very popular, but that's still shot on film. It's not shot on video.
Yeah.
And basically, people realize there's a demand, and but film is very expensive to shoot, and only the rich people can afford that, unlike video. And so my research took place mainly in Delhi, where I tracked down videographers who started their business in the 80s with the coming of video. They all aspired to be filmmakers, but did not want to shift to Bombay. And so
Okay.
video became their way of like kind of giving expression to their, desire to become filmmakers. And so it's very interesting because how it changes with the different cameras, with different editing technology. And so I think it starts with kinship networks. Again, as I say, middle class. I think caste networks matter here as well.
Okay.
Because specifically, I've had people saying that, like, oh, I belong to this caste. And so my, community helped me out by word of reference, word of, mouth that employ him. He'll shoot the marriage video, etc. And Bollywood plays a part, obviously, because they're watching Bollywood songs. So they're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be performed. So in some ways,
And
the
it's
video.
very homogenizing also in a sense, because the typical idea of a wedding that is conveyed to us through Bollywood or some of the popular videos of that era is very North Indian, upper
Yes,
caste, and
yes.
it's homogenizing. And I think this is something where we are all reverting to the mean, and across regions in India, irrespective
Yeah,
of the nuances, they all converge to that median, and they all have the same rituals after a point. There is no cultural
yeah,
nuance left. Yep.
yeah. And it's interesting. The first they had no editing, so it'll just go on and on. They'll just shoot what's happening. 3 hours, the wedding goes on. They'll just shoot like everything. DD discards this editing equipment. So they take that discarded editing equipment from the gray market and use it to edit videos. So
Right.
all these kind of like, I don't know if people remember, but you see all these effects that they try to use, for instance, they'll use like some kind of glass in front of the lens to make it look interesting, or they'll like, put like candle in and like try to have some kind of like, effect or etc. So they're playing around with these kind of things to create this some kind of like interest in the video as well. And so editing starts getting involved in video. And people, and they also like after in the post editing process, like insert Bollywood songs for bidai, for like mere yaar ki shadi hai, when it comes to like the barat, babul mere ghar mat tera ghar chhod ke ja rahe, I'm forgetting the name of the song. So that's like when the bidai
I
is
think it's
happening.
Babul ki duaएं लेती जा maybe.
Yeah, babul ki duwali.
It's Balraj Sani and Wahida Rahman. ये
Bhaidai
combined.
Rahman,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. And so it's to inject emotion into the narrative. And after that, they're like, then we become experts in the rituals. We tell them how to do it. We'll direct them how to do these rituals. And so then we see how does marriage video become mainstream with Hum Aapke Hai Kaun in 1994. Because Hum
Yes.
Aapke Hai Kaun is a 3 hour marriage video where it's just kind of like, look, these are all the weddings of the wedding ceremony. It's like the ultimate homage to the form of the marriage video.
Yes.
And it completely takes off. And then you see this grand, as you're saying, the unified, its wedding has become homogenized in the way Barjatia started it. It's taken by the Chopras and the Karan Johars. And now we see all the celebrity reels with the wedding filmer, etc. There's a standardized way of looking at the wedding. Everybody wants to have their wedding like a certain way, right? Which is like aspirational, which is, as you said, upper caste, the same kind of rituals, even though there's so much diversity within the country in terms of culture. But like seeing images influences us in the way we want to perform. And my favorite kind of thing is that how weddings, even in wedding videos, people are performing because when in front of the camera, nobody's natural, and I've written it in the book. And because I just love that conversation with my mother. And my mother's like, I know I'm supposed to cry and I'm trying really hard to cry, but I just cannot cry.
The tears and this is something very weird, right? So I've seen this even today. Like I was at a wedding recently where the actual ritual ended, and once the ritual ended, they actually started shooting that ritual, because then they would take multiple takes until they actually got the picture perfect moment right. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's evolved from the 80s to what we see right now. And I think that it's a very mutual relationship between film and the wedding video. They both influence each other. And they both are kind of projecting an image of like what is how marriage or conjugality or romance has to be performed for the camera, whether
Yep.
it's, whether it's in on fiction or in real life.
And there's this other bit, maybe we can discuss that a bit, which is about performativity. Like, I'm guessing in the era where you were just being clicked, and you were only exposed to photos that would come out as a result of those 3 days. The incentives for you to be performative are much, much lower than in a video where you have to project a certain kind of masculinity, a certain kind of femininity. And as you mentioned, like, even if you don't want to cry, you know that it's appropriate to cry at a certain stage, so you have to perform for the camera.
Yeah. Performativity is built into it. Because you're now in front of the camera. Like photography is still, video is motion. Whenever there's motion, and then it's being projected. And also, the interesting thing was that with the upper classes, obviously, a lot of these photographers also, videographers, some of them started as photography studios. And not everybody has access to TV set or a VCR. So they might just get the local cable wala to have like a local screening of the wedding video. But now, who wants to see everybody's 3 hour wedding video? And how is it possible that everybody can watch that wedding video? So that brought the marriage photo album back into vogue.
Right.
But marriage photo album in the way that it's like collage type design. And then as you see, like the new developments that you see is kind of like a snapshot of a wedding video. So you have like the long wedding video, but they also create like a 15-minute or 30-minute like reel for those who are like close friends or family but cannot watch the whole video. So it's kind of interspersed with interviews with everyone, along, what is the like romantic journey of the couple. And so you romanticize that story, along with like, events from the wedding. Capsule reel, you call that the capsule reel, and that's like a
Yep.
compressed even further. I think the best example of that capsule reel would be what Deepika and Ranveer showed at Coffee with Karan. um
Yep.
uh, yeah, and so that's what's in vogue right now.
Yep. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is admittedly my favorite chapter from your book, which is about Hiba films. And I think that the reason why I got drawn to the book is that chapter. A question here. So, in terms of the incentives to cater to such a market, right? I understand that Narihira wanted to probably do something more risk, something more Western that could appeal to the upper middle or class audiences, going against the social mores of that decade. But in terms of similar subject, like, there were mainstream filmmakers like B.R. Ishara or say Mahesh Bhatt, obviously on a more philosophical level, who is looking at subjects that are considered taboo in polite society. So, what was maybe the driver for Nari Hira to get into producing such movies? Because I'll give you a very good simile for this, a very good parallel for this. This is Mahesh Bhatt and the kind of movies that the Bhatts made in the 2000s, right? The Imran Hashmi
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
It's basically about salacious bits selling in the market, good commerce, and they were basically picking up similar subjects and remaking that for Indian audiences with song and dance, right? What was the incentive for Narihira? Was it something similar, or okay, if you could
It
probably help
It was
expand?
it was clearly, it was essentially the fact that he, besides obviously running a successful publishing business, and he was in advertising, which was a successful business as well. He started exporting video cassettes of Hindi films, and so the first film that he did was Pyar Jhukta Nahi, and Pyar Jhukta Nahi, he noticed, was a huge success on the video circuit across overseas in multiple markets, and he's like, oh, there's some potential here. Also, remember, because he's in advertising and he's publishes, he has good access to reader data and what they want.
Yep.
Um, and Starter's primary audience is women. And so he's
Okay.
like,
Yep.
number one, like a video is doing well. We have women as this kind of thing, so we know what the stories they want to. And then he's like, he felt that the economics works really well. That he's going to choose like he's going to make films in like 3 4 months. He's going to standardize it. He has the island in Mud Island, like he has the two bungalows in Mud Island, which are going to be shot there. And he's going to handpick actors and audition them. He has his own in-house like editor who sends to London to do like his training and get
Video
equipment.
editing course,
Yeah,
effectively. Analog video
yeah.
editing course. Okay.
And then come and like get all the equipment also from London to shoot. And essentially picks up these directors who are coming from FTII. Very interesting point also is when film schools are coming up in India. And so he's taking these
Yes.
like directors up, and it's a professionalization that's taking place. So he's like, oh, economics makes sense because I'm producing them at like, and it's not, he's writing the scripts, which are basically bootlegged copies. It's
Yes.
made in 4 months. It releases on like it releases on video, and there's not much money involved. And also he's like, I'm an advertising person. For instance, if I want to feature, I want to get an access to a location beyond Mud Island, I'll just tell that person, for example, if I'm using a hotel, I'll put a advertisement of your hotel in one of my magazines. You give it to us for
Right.
free. And so that's also how he's kind of subsidizing his own business. So he recognizes there's a potential for a different medium to tell different types of stories, and he creates a kind of video production studio, handpicked. So he like the thing is straight to video erotic thrillers. Disco kind of songs are like a forte. All the actors who are kind of second lead in Bollywood are kind of leads here, like Supriya Pathak Kapoor or like is
Right.
like Aditya Pancholi. And Aditya Pancholi debuted on like video. And one of my interesting stories also here is when we talked about what's the difference between video as a storytelling, is when he talks about auditions. And he's like, we had Chunky Pandey and Aditya Pancholi auditioning at the same time. We
Okay.
looked at Chunky and we were like, no, he's not a video star. He's made for film. But when we looked at Aditya and we looked at his eyes and they were so ferocious, it seemed that it is perfect for video. And I think that just explicated the difference between what is video and what is film very beautifully in the way how industry people see it. You
Yes.
know, what is the difference they see between like who could be a video star and who's a film star? And so that was, I think, his motivation to make these films. They made, I think, around 27 films. But he ended the business citing piracy as a major kind of like thing that he could not control. He also had his own anti-piracy unit,
Okay.
which had like former retired like police commissioners, etc., to crack down. But he's like, it became unsustainable. So that's the formal reason that's cited. Informal reasons I cannot get into because obviously ethically I cannot disclose that,
Right.
since
Sure. Sure.
that's like in confidence, and I'm not supposed to kind of do it. But that's the story that's kind of like perpetuated at Piracy killed the video business. And he also started like his own shampoo brand. So like Bollywood stars had Lux, and all these female stars were locked by Lux. So he launched a shampoo called Lure,
Okay.
and he would have his like female video star who was Nita Puri, who was the biggest video star, and she was Lure. She was the Lure girl. So he was kind of, it was interesting in the way he was looking at the economics of it, which he thought was speedy, fast, making it like, and as you said, 2000s that like maybe we see the same model being replicated, but it's happening much early in the 80s with Nari Hira and his video films. And Manmohan Singh was really like, sorry, Manmohan Desai like was really resentful of this
Okay.
because of the fact that the censor board was did not allow bold scenes and would like really go and censor like you'll only see the flowers meeting or whatever.
Yes.
And
Yep. Yep.
Nari Hira said he never had any trouble with the censors. And Manmohan Desai saw Shingora and he's like, how did this film pass the censor? This is so vulgar. Like, how can they do this? How can they pass the film? So there was this like, people were upset that why is video not being like subject to this kind of censorship in a way film is being as
But they
well.
were all under the purview of the same Cinematograph Act, I'm guessing, or were they
Yes,
not?
and the Cinematograph Act was amended for video because the
Okay.
the film industry lobbied. They're like, what's happening? Like, video
Yeah.
needs to
Yeah.
come under review. We are under threat. So the government amended the Cinematograph Act to include video in the purview. So video had to go to the censor board. Video had to be like, rated. But I think the attitude was that video is playing at homes. Parents have some say in it. Parents will not allow their kids to watch the video. So it was a more and more lax attitude towards video in a way that was not for film.
Right. And I think when I was perusing some of the titles you have mentioned in your book, I think the most important cast member who I was curious about is a person called Kirti Anurag, who was the music director, I guess, for all of these movies. I could not find a single non-Hiba film credit for Kirti Anurag before or after these movies over that phase, right? 1985 to 1989, 90 of sorts, right? There's something very interesting here. In the early 90s, if you remember, all of these channels, satellite channels, had this concept of a TV movie, right? Like a good example would be Fir Teri Kahani Yaad Aayi, starring
Mhm.
Rahul Roy, Pooja Bhatt, and the sorts. So,
Hmm.
was the TV movie and the satellite, and this whole satellite channel industry, was this partially responsible for ending video films in some sense?
For sure, for sure. And again, and it's just that's the interesting part about video. It's such a short-lived technology because satellite comes immediately in the 90s and kills video in the sense it kills the marriage video. So not the marriage video, it kills like the video film and the video news magazine, but doesn't kill like wedding videos, doesn't kill like amateur film movies, it doesn't kill these kind of personal aspects, but it does kill the commercial as these kind of commercial forms, for sure, for sure.
Right, right. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is news, and it's this whole concept of a news magazine in the form of analog video, which is anti-establishment avowedly, and this is at a critical juncture in Indian history where you have, after the anti-Sikh riots, you have the Mandal movement, you also have the Babri movement, the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, and you have one version of the one official version of the event narrated by Doordarshan, which is deemed to be some kind of propaganda. It's the version that the powers that be effectively want you to know, and there's this iconoclastic anti-establishment news track magazine that wants you to know the truth, which isn't proffered to you by Doordarshan. So couple of questions here. We can definitely get into how Newstrack and the way they narrated the news was different from the modus operandi of Doordarshan. The first question I had here is, did you actually get to see most of these videos? Because, say, Abhinandan Sekhri is still in the business through News Laundry. So, did he have access to all of the videos? I'm guessing. I'm just curious.
I think thank you for asking this question because here I it's funny here I sometimes when you're doing your PhD and you're like thinking of converting into a book, you're like, does my research matter?
Right.
What does it matter? Does it really like have any significance? And Newstrack in some ways answered that question. I was desperate to find those tapes. So, for
Right.
instance, first I went to like the India Today office and I got access to the archives.
Okay.
And instead of like archiving the tapes, they have just taken important portions from the tape, which are like important portion in Indian history, and they just saved it on DV. But that doesn't tell that.
It's basically those portions we see on TV, right? Like whenever they
Yeah,
are
yeah.
remembering
Which they can, yeah.
Babri, they keep on showing those reels. Yep.
Yeah. So, but then I'm like, no, but I want to see the cassettes. I want to see the film. And so they're like, okay. Then they finally found like the cassettes. Most of them have got fungus on them. Number one. Number two, the engineers don't know how to, their engineers are completely stumped how to play video. So I'm like, okay, dead end, not happening. Then, as you talked about Abhinandan Sekhri, I went to the News Laundry office and to interview them. And they only had one or two tapes themselves. He said he
Oh,
was very
okay.
kind and he gave me the tapes, but that's not enough for me to know. I hunted down collectors. Even still, I was not getting tapes, and obviously, I'm a PhD student, and I cannot like convert the tapes. How many tapes can I convert at my own cost?
Right.
I got a Fulbright to go to Columbia University. And turns out I found all the news track tapes there.
Wow.
They had the entire archive of news track tapes, and they're like, you're the first person in 30, 20 plus years to use, like, to actually access the tape. Nobody has used the tapes before. We were thinking of throwing them. I'm like,
Oh, wow.
please don't throw them. They're like huge part of Indian history. I wrote like so many emails to like everyone, like all this like big South Asian scholars to like in the library, that it's such a valuable archival source, and I will like watch all the tapes. I'll make notes. I'll tell you where the tapes are going bad so that you preserve them. And the interesting part is every year after I published the news track like article, but even those who knew that I was working on this, I get calls around December that can we use your images for the like the Babri Masjid tape? Do you have the tape? Can you give it to us? And how these are people who should ideally have it. And so the researcher has now become the archivist
The
who is
archive, yes.
giving them
Exactly.
like like telling them this is what's happening, which is why this is important,
Right.
because in India we don't take archiving media seriously. And if we don't archive our media histories, especially in a time when everything is mediatized, and we choose, pick and select that this is worthy of archiving and this is not, then we're losing a very crucial part of our stories. And that's why it's important for researchers to come in. And so, yes, this is how I found news track tapes. Like, it was such a long journey for me to come and find those tapes. And if anybody
Lots
wants
of
to go.
serendipity. I think lots of serendipity there as well. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. But like really hunting down, like trying to find them, like making sure, and it's on. And I watched all the tapes, all the
Okay.
tapes. I have detailed notes. I have like photographs taken from them. So it's just kind of I got, as you said, serendipity. I got lucky.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe we can delve into how is the modus operandi for narrating the event different in a news track tape vis-a-vis, say, a Doordarshan tape. So one very defining feature of Doordarshan is it's a prim and proper host or an anchor who is reading out news in like almost low monosyllable, bereft of emotion. News track anchors are just the reverse, right? Full of emotion. It's a very jerky shot. It seems like you are almost vicariously participating in the event. You're on the ground, but you're just not on the ground. And voices are not modulated. It's hurried. It's way more natural. A lot of that might have been performative as well to differentiate themselves from regular news. But yeah,
I think that was deliberate. I think they were like, this is the clipped Doordarshan style of speaking proper English, which is convent
yes,
educated English.
yes,
They wanted to push back and have a more natural style, which is much more familiar to viewers, a register of like an accent and an intonation that is more familiar to viewers. And even if it's in English and everyday, in English that you hear it in every day, instead of that inaccessible, as you said, monosyllabic, without emotion, convent educated kind of English that we know what it is. And I think they're very proud of that, to introduce this change in language within like narrating news, which I do think gives it a sense of dynamism. And I think they have the sense of dynamism because they're using video. These are people who are learning how to use video on the ground. So a lot of like the earlier news trackers basically talk about how the Mandal movement problematically was their first politicization movement.
okay,
And they got politicized because of the Mandal movement, and they wanted to be part of news track because of this, which is in its own like thing, if you can, are problematic depending on what your position on caste is. But I do think it's problematic. And what is very different in news track is that because it's a video news magazine, they don't have to show 5 minute clips. They can actually go deeper into a story. So, for
yes,
instance, I think with Babri Masjid, they had 250, 300 hours of footage, which they cut to 15 minutes. And the fact was that the government did not want to release that tape. They had to fight. And they went to the tribunal, which has now been abolished by the new government, where you cannot now fight the censor board decisions. And the tape was out. It was the best-selling tape. No tape like matched that record. And it is because people knew that they're going to see a version of news that they're not going to do. Doordarshan will not show them. Like there was like I have told, my parents have like recounted, so many people in my family have recounted that time where they like would either go and like are borrowing the tape from the library or buying the tape, or like somebody has it, so watching the tape or the community viewings of the tape, because people want to see what's happening. If it was everywhere, right?
Right.
So and it's unlike today's moment where like it's so easily available. And I think so that's kind of like even so they covered everything like from Kashmir to like Mandal Masjid to like the Janmabhoomi movement. And there's a like it's not just the Babri Masjid movement, they do a lead up. You can actually
Yes.
see how it's like coming through. And you see like a very young Narendra Modi as a Karyakarta in their videos as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and so everything is kind of like building up, and they keep on following the stories, so they talk about making sense of news. And so I think that was kind of, and as you said, like the language changes. There's a certain sense of dynamism. A lot of times, they really sensationalize things. Like sometimes
Yes.
it was difficult for me to watch the tapes. For instance, when Rajiv Goswami immolated himself, and right now, trigger warning is all the rage. But when you're as an like archiving and you're like watching these tapes, you're not ready for what you're about to see. And
Yes.
seeing a close up of this burned body, and I'm just horrified. Why am I watching this? I don't. Where is the humanity here? And so you
Right.
see a lot of like things that are horrifying to see are like being like zoomed in, are they given close-ups. It's not that inhumane in a way that we see right now, which is even more sensationalized, but I do think that the grammar of sensationalized news that we see today, we have to track back to news track.
Right.
Even though I do think news track had more integrity, I do think that news track would go into depth. I think news track did give value in the way they went into those stories. A lot of people that we know, journalists who are interesting, can come from news track, like Abhinandan Sikri, but also Nishtha Jain who is a very renowned documentary filmmaker, was an editor at news track.
Okay.
Uh, and so she was also one of my resources to get those tapes and everything. So we see that there is this kind of thing, and Newstrack does get co-opted by Doordarshan. Newstrack becomes like once like they realize that, oh, satellite TV has come, Gulf War, like the Gulf War comes in, satellite TV, everybody wants to see like news on television now. They become a program on Doordarshan. So they basically something that was anti-establishment, because Doordarshan was called Rajiv Darshan. Rajiv Gandhi, after the Bofors scandal, basically had complete control over Doordarshan. So they
Right.
wanted an alternative version of news, and it also spawned a lot of imitators. And my favorite imitator is Kal Chakra, and which is very interesting because Kal Chakra actually changed law in India. Like they had an effect in changing law in India, and were the precursors to what we think about the sting operation. It was not the Helka, it was Kal Chakra which started the sting operation. Anyways, aside to this, but Newstrack then gets co-opted by the very thing that it was trying to be against.
Yep. Yep. And I think yeah, whether this was intentional or not, we don't know. But back in the day, India's official stand or the official version was very Nehruvian. You had a certain consensus on the kind of version of contested truths that you all had access to, and all that we subscribe to, in a sense. In some sense, Newstrack paved the way for Hindutva to maybe get a voice. Not very sure. Maybe in some sense, Hindutva to get a voice, because
I mean, I think
any official version of news reportage by Doordarshan would try to minimize Hindutva to only remain as a fringe element that no one should take seriously, perhaps.
I'm not sure if they did, honestly, because if you look at the Babri tape, it is very critical. And
Yes.
if you see the reportage as well, it's critical. And if you talk to most of the people involved, they themselves are very critical of what
Right.
happened. They still believed in that idea of a secular India. One of the anchors who did cover the story, Manoj, I'm forgetting his name. I'm so bad with names, even though I've written it there in the book. He was more, I think, sympathetic towards the Hindu right.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean overall if one person's ideology influences the entire organization. So I don't think that I mean like their Mandal coverage for me is problematic. And there's certain
Right.
other things I find problematic, but I do think they were very critical of the the Ram Janmabhoomi movement.
Makes sense. Now that we are into religion, it's a perfect segue to the next chapter of your book, which is the final chapter of sorts. This is about Osho, the phenomenon called Osho. The interesting bit about Osho is like we all know about Osho, like people of a newer vintage who might not have heard of Osho or seen his videos would have definitely come across Osho thanks to that Netflix documentary, Wild Wild Country. Yeah, that's what it's called, right? And I think growing up, the first thing we often heard about Vinod Khanna is the fact that he suddenly disappeared for 5 years from the Hindi film industry just to serve as a gardener in Osho's ashram in Oregon, right? So with Osho, there's this clear documentation of his progress. He starts off giving these pravachnas, which are then documented through audio tapes, and that's when eventually they make way to video cassettes and analog video technology when that's in vogue. And this is basically the circulated version that we continue seeing on YouTube. You have these snippets of Osho that continue resurfacing on YouTube every now and then. Maybe we can understand Osho's rise through video technology and its focus on close shots, on intimacy, and how effective emotionally Osho's videos were thanks to analog video technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was the first person, religious guru, who understood the power of media
Yep.
in a, and is a precursor to all the religious gurus that we see now. Although I do have to say that he has more heft than others because I had to listen to, I spent a lot of time like reading his work and listening to all the pravachans. Or I could be biased because I grew up, my father was a huge admirer of Osho, but I was always
Okay.
skeptical.
Okay. Okay.
I was always skeptical, but I liked his voice a lot. His voice I found very soothing and
Very
something that I
soothing,
could
right?
fall to that, and
It's
I could
something that
fall
you can
to
go
sleep.
to sleep here
Yeah,
listening to. Exactly. I know.
exactly.
I know. Yeah. It's like the original ASMR video or ASMR voice or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, and also because he's a PhD, he's very widely read. So also I found it interesting to engage with his pravachan because I know if I want to critique him, I will have to be sharp as well. It's not that it's more easier, I think, with this generation of gurus where it's like it's so surface level, but it's there is like for instance his pravachan on Bhagavad Gita is actually very really good, where he has his own reading of the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's very enriching, and actually, a lot of his original pravachans were in Hindi, which I find very stimulating. And I felt like engaging with them academically was an interesting exercise for me as well. I find he's an interesting character. Like I find it very difficult to completely dismiss him, you know and the kind of phenomena that he was, there was no way he could have been that phenomena because of this kind of interest. And I know like Sadhguru famously is following the same kind of, at least the mediatic example.
Right.
And they're very vested in his legacy. He himself knew the power of video. Like he had like German videographers as part of like the ashram, and he would ask them to video all his pravachans in the ashram. He was very conscious about what he's wearing. He was very conscious about how he's using his hands. He was very conscious how he's being presented on video. He was very stylish, and Vinod Khanna was not
Vinod
only
Khanna.
like a partner because they were the same height. He would be actually would try out his clothes to see if they fit well, and
Mhm.
then it would go to him because they would be hand stitched personally for him, and Vinod Khanna would try it on, and then it would like go. And I think Osho wanted Vinod Khanna to take over as well, but he refused. And it's very mediatized. Even now, if you see that they have all these YouTube collections, like you can have access to all their videos on YouTube. They have a blog. Um, they're like actually very influential academic philosophers who have taken him very seriously and take his work and engage with it. And and the fact is that it's still worldwide. You will find Osho ashram franchises all over the world. He's still one of
Yes.
the most best-selling authors. And I think a lot of that has to do with how mediatized his entire thing is. Even when you go to the ashram, it's super mediatized. The moment you come in, you feel cameras everywhere. There is this, like, everything is mediated through some kind of technology or some kind of, even though it's like a cell phone free zone. And when you're doing the final meditation, which is the peak experience in the ashram, everything is closed down, and you go in this like large hall. They project like one of his like archive pravachans where we listen to and meditate along with. So it's a very conscious kind of retaining of his legacy via video, where video is like constantly reproducing his aura for new generations. And I think he was very canny in the way that he recognized that like audio, like he should be recorded in audio cassettes. Audio cassettes helped him like get a following. Once he was able to get like more like get his own ashram and funding, etc., he got videographers and who would shoot him, and it was a proper professional setup. So I think that's kind of it's the first time that we see like somebody commodifying this
Bhakti.
pravachan to reach the
Bhakti.
audience.
And I think for the uninitiated, if you're yet to read Ishita's book, I think she has inadvertently let all our audiences know that she actually did the field work herself, and she attended a couple of sessions at Osho's ashram in Pune, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was there for like quite some time, and then I think I had to leave because when I thought the distinction between the researcher and the person was getting blurred, this was the time to leave.
Yes.
Because I was like, I could because you're like, oh, I'm getting seduced by ashram life, and I need to
Yes.
leave because this is where like the researcher and the integrity of the researcher has to be maintained, and I can't
Right.
let my be swept away because if I continued, I'll become biased. And how do I to retain that objectivity? And I can honestly see that why it still thrives as a movement, not only because of what he says, which I've it's not easy to dismiss, but also when you go to the ashram, it's organized spatially in such an open way. You know, if you go to the tea point in the ashram, you will meet people from all nationalities across like the globe. So you're having a very cosmopolitan environment within that ashram. And like there is, as a woman in India, where we don't get to express ourselves so freely, there is
Yep.
so much dancing all around the ashram. You're so free and loose with your body, and you
Okay.
feel okay. And I can see why a lot of, plus they have their own organic farm, so you're eating well. But like it's really expensive to be there. And like if you want to sustain your life, then you have to start working for them, to start archiving things, to start detailing
Right.
logs. Uh, so I'm like, okay, this is now I think I need to like leave. But this was, I think it was important because even though he's so mediatized, it was the most difficult to get information here than for anything else. So it's this really like ironic that all the tapes are available, very easy to find the tapes, very easy to like get access to it, but it's very difficult to get information exactly to what's happening. Unlike where others, where you're able to like go and get people, hunt down archival sources, like talk to people, like create a network, that was not happening here. So I had to like find ways to like figure this out.
Makes sense. One of the interesting frameworks that I came across in your book is Svetlana Boym's sociology of nostalgia, or the future of nostalgia of sorts. And this is very resonant, right? So when the pandemic hit, as you have written in the book itself, for succor, I would often turn to Doordarshan and watch like reruns of Wagle Ki Duniya, Circus, Fauji, and all those early Shah Rukh Khan serials, right? Which I would have seen on and off on YouTube, but the fact that Doordarshan was telecasting those serials was an added impetus. just want to understand, why do we still have this affinity towards video and analog video even in today's day and age? Is it just s- the act of remembering something and searching for a past that's it's still not, it's not there anymore, but we seek it in some sense? How do you explain the emotional balance that it still carries?
I think many, I think about it a lot too, because my current research is on streaming video.
Okay.
Um, and I think one of like I think nostalgia is also because as we grow older, we are more nostalgic about technologies and objects and things which are remind you of your youth. Because I think as we grow older, we are not so in touch with what's new, like what's the latest music and what's the latest thing people are watching. You're much more interested in what gives you more comfort and like
Yes.
reminds you of those good times. The other thing I think is that with video especially, the way we interact with technology started with video, the time shifting, right? Rewind, pause, fast forward, etc. This would not have happened had video would not been there, which we are now we can like, this kind of attention, limited attention span, which has now become so little it is because with video as well. And I think partly it's also because of like the content that we are seeing right now. And there is a nostalgia, for instance, like even right now in theaters, Ye Jawani Hai Deewani or Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is doing much better than the new releases.
New releases,
It-
yes.
There is a nostalgia, and which is also a failure of content to
Yes.
give what people want. And so I think there are like lots of these things that, plus, I think another thing, the most important thing also is that you never know with these streaming platforms when something will be available and not available. It's not archived in a way a DVD or a video or a VCD will archive something, or a film will like a film reel will archive something. And the best example, for instance, is when like Warner Brothers was like, oh, we are canning things. We are like destroying, we are like, all these things. And you're like, and people are then talking about how piracy now will become the saving source of like film culture.
Yes.
So this like there's this fear also of like who knows, people have different taste. Maybe people like some trashy stuff which they watch for comfort and then it's not available and then you want to watch it. How will you watch it? Don't we like, I'm sure that lots of people have nostalgia for Kanti Shah's Gunda. It's been a
Yes.
huge part of people like growing up. You don't find Gunda on any of these streaming platforms. Where will you find Gunda? You will find like a documentary on like Kanti Shah, but you'll not find his films. So how
It's
will you?
that show on Amazon Prime, right? Which
Yeah,
Asim
yeah,
Chandawar and all of them actually
yeah.
compiled, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
They do. Asim Chanda will like put those like, so there, why does his Instagram channel has so many followers? Because like where will you get access to these things?
Yes.
So again, which tells you like what do we tend to archive and what do we don't tend to archive. There is a cult kind of thing for this content as well. I love the Ramsey brothers, I love Irana. I love the opening of Virana. And how will I watch Virana? I go to YouTube and watch it. I'm not going to watch it on like
Yes.
streaming platforms. But what if it's disappeared on YouTube? How do I watch it? You know? And so I think this is kind of, it plays in various ways. And so I found that I think I was writing this last like kind of like afterthoughts of a technology and like thinking about why it matters to like this technology. And as you said, it's the pandemic. You're having that nostalgia. You're going back to all of these kind of like things. And I think it did really resonated, this idea of nostalgia. And I would say the future is analog. There is a reason why people are going back to like vinyls or like DVDs or all these things to
Yes.
have some kind of like, there is something at the end of the day to hold a physical object in your hand and have an attachment with that physical object. So many people, when I was doing this like research on video, would talk about holding the tape, cleaning the tape, rewinding the tape with their hand. Or like, my most favorite example is that when they know a tape is like kind of corrupted, Basic Instinct was one of the best selling like tapes.
I'm
And
guessing the part that would have been rewound the most is that I'm guessing it's where she crosses her legs and crosses
yeah,
them back.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure that would have been that. It
Yeah.
would have been
And
that
so
scene. Yeah.
people and everybody wants to watch it, and nobody can watch it because it's been rewound and fast forwarded so many times that now it's got all these interlaced lines. But there is a clear, because why are these interlaced lines? You're having a very tactile relationship, a very physical relationship with technology, which now we don't have.
Yes.
Except for the mobile phone, you don't have any, you're not really touching it, feeling it, interacting with it, making it better in a way that was before. So there is this nostalgia also for the physical object. And this fascination perhaps for like a generation that doesn't know this. And so I think that was something that really played on my mind when I was thinking about those final thoughts for like how to think about this era and what are its like long-term kind of legacies of this era. Besides the fact that I see clear parallels between this and what's happening in the streaming movement.
And I think another immediate legacy of this era was, I think Hiba Films was the model that Mithun Chakraborty used to create Mithun's Dream Factory in Uti in the late 90s or the mid 90s, and Enroute become the highest taxpayer in the country. So we are slowly approaching the end of this conversation. My penultimate question is a meta question. You are
Okay.
studying video cultures in the global south in India. Is this sufficient to form a new theory of video culture, which might be perhaps at odds with theories that explain the emergence of video culture in, say, the United States?
Yeah, of
Or
course.
can this be only seen as an extension? What is your view on it?
Of course. In the book, I actually clearly make those states because of the fact that very different, they're very different media cultures. Number one, that India is a very informal culture. Informality thrives in every aspect of Indian life. And that's not
Yes.
true of India for most of global South. That is not true of, like, say, the United States or Western Europe. Unfortunately, and I know you told me not to speak about theory, but this is such a sore point for me.
Yes, sure,
Uh,
sure. Go ahead, go ahead.
I'm trying to be as simple as possible. We think that whatever theory comes from United States and Western Europe is universalizing, and whatever like comes from India or Latin America or like Senegal or like China, it's local. But
Anthropology, case study, whatever.
yeah, it's a case
Yeah.
study when basically we are the global majority. What
Yes.
happens here? It's the biggest film producing nation in the world. It is
Yes.
Netflix most prized. It is streaming international streaming platforms most prized market. That's why you have Netflix making so much investments. That's why you have Disney like dealing with Reliance because they want to have that slice of the market. As China is inadmissible, and even a small percentage of Indian market is a huge amount of subscribers for them. It's a difficult market to crack also because they don't understand how price sensitive and how diverse this market is. And so there's so many things. And then when India, in terms of the media industry, also most industries in the world need screen quotas to protect itself from Hollywood. India has never needed screen quotas to protect itself
Yes.
from Hollywood. You know, then why is this film industry seen as area studies? Why is this media industry seen as area studies when it's actually countering one of the biggest, most important media industries in the world? I cannot begin to even tell you the impact of these industries where I have had people talking about Indian TV shows, Indian films, like different eras. People who don't even know any word of Hindi will like recite songs for me when I've traveled across the world. And I know that it's such a big currency, our TV shows and our films. And with video, we see that it counters the way it functions in the US. When in the US, they're like, oh, there is bootlegging happening. Oh, video is like this new tech. It is seen in a very different, it's a post-cinematic technology. Or video kind of ushers in this new revolution of the post-cinematic. Where and you don't see this kind of like a you have some kind of socio-political context, but it's very different. Here, in India, it just happens very differently, where it is seen as an object of modernity. It'll be information, turns gray market. lots of like people have make lots of things, and this is the first book. I'm sure there'll be much more research, hopefully, I hope,
Yes.
because they came up with so much material, and I hope people take this up in the 80s, because nobody has done this. People are making video news magazines, and the video news magazine was a model unique only to India, which is very interesting as well. Nowhere
Yes.
else, you know. And you're having these straight to video erotic thrillers, and you're having wedding videos, and you're having all these kind of things. So it's very informal also, or gray. It's not totally formalized or set in stone. You and so I think, and it's responding very, very directly to the socio-cultural context of that time. And so I and also it's not like archived in a way, it's archived there. And so like for instance, like for instance, there's this huge kind of disdain for piracy when they talk about video, and they're like, oh no, this is a practice of bootlegging, which is seen as a cinephilic practice. I mean, why do you need to make this distinction? What
It's
about
piracy, it's theft. It's basically the
yeah,
same
but
thing.
like, why is piracy theft? What about in the global majority? We don't have access to resources, so people should not have access to watching, to be part of global film
Exactly.
culture. Yeah,
Exactly.
and so that this is this kind of thing that I don't understand. And I do think that this, and I'm sure anybody who reads this book, um, you hope your book find audiences and has a life beyond its own, who knows? But like I taught a course on video, and we could clearly see within the course also that there's so many similarities, say, between Iran, India, Korea, China, Latin America, and they have nothing to do with what's happening in the US and Western Europe. But yet they're seen as universal theories, and we are seen as area studies. And they will not let us, write our book or pass the book or like have it through peer review if you don't cite them, even though they're not obligated to cite us. Why should we cite them? And it doesn't make really sense. But okay, I have to show my expertise as a scholar. So it also shows like the imbalance that we have in knowledge, in thinking about knowledge, in producing knowledge, and who gets to produce knowledge, and in what way, and who gets the legitimacy to produce knowledge. And I think these are these inequities which still exist, that we have to be mindful of. And hopefully, I don't know how if things will change or not. But it's not like this is like the first book that's doing it. I know there are multiple books that are doing this. For you, because you talked about Mithun's work, I have a colleague called Vibhushan Suba who's worked on this like C grade films.
Okay.
Hopefully his book will come out, and he's actually worked on Kanti Shah.
Oh wow. Amazing.
And so really, yeah, and I'm looking forward to that. So and so like I hope that there are many, there are, it's not I hope, I know there are many such works that are very rich and which fill that gap and make us alert to different ways of how media technologies worked in different parts of the world.
Thank you so much. The final question, which is something I wanted to ask you definitely. How did
Okay.
you come up with the cover design? Like, it's so, so beautiful. It's like just arresting. It's so kick-ass. You just have a look at the cover. You can't ignore this book. Like, how did you even come up with that design? So, how was.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was like really, really in about the cover. I was like so, because I lost my battle of like wanting I wanted a different title for the book, but I
Okay.
lost my battle with the publishers regarding that. I wanted the book to be called Analog Memories. Uh, but then with the cover, I was just like, I dug my heels in. I was sure I wanted a cover that had to be evocative. The moment somebody like saw the cover, they knew exactly what it was.
Yes. Yeah.
And so Oxford sent me a couple of options, and I like these are all generic stuff that they have taken. And I actually called up a friend of mine who's a curator. I'm like, do you know photographers or artists who can actually take photographs of my field site? Because I was in Canada at that time. And I said, I'll pay them, and I'll also make sure they're credited. You'll see the credit of the photographer on the book as well at the back cover. And he said, yeah, I know somebody. And I'm like, okay. And so I told her where the sites I went to, in at least in Delhi. And she had these she took photographs. And I love this photograph because I'm just like, it just encapsulates everything. it was the most evocative. This whole thing of like it's like completely dense, but you see all those videos, it's a corner shop, and like for me at least. And so I sent this image to OUP and took all the permissions, because I did like pay this person and asked them for their permission, got the thing signed. So I commissioned, because I commissioned this photograph, and they're like, okay, but they're like, there's a series design, so we'll animate it a bit. So the photograph was animated a bit to fit with the series design. And I think I was just I was not sure if it would work or not, but when I saw it on hard copy, I'm like, yeah, this works. So I'm really happy that you found the cover evocative, because this was something that I was very, very very sure that this is what I wanted.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ishita, for the time. You've given our audiences a lot of time. What are you working on? What are your future projects? If you could probably share with our audiences, if it's not too private.
It's not private, because a lot of it, all my future project is in the public domain.
Okay,
Uh,
nice.
I do two things. I work on streaming platforms. I've written extensively on streaming platforms on India. For instance, I've written dossiers on Netflix and Amazon. I have written on like Amazon being kind of like a platform ecosphere, which whatever different thing. Written about like, because I work a lot through interviews and archive method. And so I've like talked about how storytelling practices have changed on OTT platforms, about like how tracing the evolution of how OTT platform comes into India and what are the changes it gets in the Indian media scape. So recently now I'm working on like data algorithms and taste and OTT platforms and like
Wow.
censorship, these are like two articles which should come out by I think next year or end of this year. And so I've written extensively on that, and hopefully hoping to turn this into a book on streaming in India. And the second is that, as you said, I direct a research lab, which works on migration and media. And specifically, it's a collaboration-based lab. As we are based in Montreal, we collaborate with community-based organizations to create research-based practice projects, which could be like training people how to make video and creating videos, podcast, walking tours, etc., which are all on our website, rahlab.org. So these are the two things that I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Rahlab.org will be linked in the show notes. And I
Thank
would
you.
urge all our audiences to seek out your book. It was fantastic, and it was especially nostalgic for someone like me whose earliest memory of video is seeing his parents' marriage video. That's probably a common memory that many of us share. And this wasn't Hindi Bollywood songs, but Bengali songs playing in the background, and you get a sense of the cultural make of that era when this was shot. Thank you so much, and all the best for
Thank you.
your future work.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you. And I just wanted to say that, like, as an academic, uh, I've always wanted this work to transcend academia and not be for just academics. And so it's really nice to talk in a non-academic fashion about the book. And it's nice that there are some people who are reading this.
Thank you.